My stepmother sat just a few feet away from me in that cold courtroom and told the judge that I was completely unable to care for myself. She wore an expensive luxury watch that belonged to my late father while painting me as a fragile person who lost her grip on reality. I did not shed a single tear as she spoke those lies. Instead, I sat perfectly still and counted the days until her world would completely shatter. Looking around Courtroom 4B, I realized that none of my relatives were going to stand up for me. Victoria entered our lives a decade ago, shortly after my mother passed away from a terrible illness. She arrived with a brilliant smile that easily masked her greedy intentions, and she quickly convinced my grieving father to marry her. He was vulnerable and she took full advantage of his deep sorrow. For many years, Victoria systematically isolated my father from his brother and his oldest friends to prevent anyone from telling him the truth. She did not care about him at all because her only real devotion was to his massive investment portfolio. She craved the luxury estate, the vacation home, and the steady financial distributions from the family commercial real estate trust that my grandfather established decades ago. When my father suffered a fatal stroke and passed away in the intensive care unit, Victoria was already on her phone contacting financial advisors. Soon after the funeral, I uncovered the true situation regarding the estate. My father changed his will to leave the entire commercial trust to me, but Victoria found out early. She spent months secretly moving hundreds of thousands of dollars into hidden accounts. A normal person would have screamed or immediately filed a massive lawsuit against her. However, I knew that Victoria was actively counting on me to react with explosive emotion. If I caused a scene, she would use that behavior to convince everyone that I was unstable and unfit to manage the inheritance. She wanted to destroy my credibility so that no one would believe my claims about the missing money. Therefore, I chose to do the exact opposite by becoming completely invisible to her radar. I moved into a tiny studio apartment, drove a battered old vehicle, and wore basic clothing. I attended every single family dinner and smiled warmly across the table at my stepmother while letting her pat my hand. Every night I sat alone tracking every single dollar she stole on my computer. Victoria assumed I was just a simple low-level office worker with a boring life and no special skills. She had no idea that I spent years working in forensic accounting, specifically investigating complex corporate fraud. I spent my entire career tracking missing money through dark digital hallways for major entities. She was not robbing a helpless grieving daughter, but rather a professional investigator who did this for a living. I allowed her to continue the theft so that she would trap herself completely. I gathered transaction histories, timestamps, and device tracking numbers for every single transfer she initiated. She established 3 distinct shell companies with names like Obsidian Holdings and Horizon Consulting to conceal the funds. I assembled a massive document folder that contained undeniable proof of her actions, and then I waited for her next move. The trap snapped shut when Victoria officially requested an emergency conservatorship over me. She paid a corrupt medical professional named Dr. Silas Thorne to write a false evaluation without ever meeting me in person. He claimed I suffered from severe cognitive decline based entirely on the false stories Victoria provided over the telephone. Now she was presenting this fabricated narrative to the judge to seize control of my life. Victoria dabbed her eyes with a tissue and told Judge Harrington that I regularly missed basic payments and forgot where I was. Behind her, the gallery was packed with my relatives who nodded along in total agreement. She spent months preparing them for this performance with tearful phone calls and false expressions of concern. She turned my own family into a weapon against me, and they believed every word she said. Her attorney Lawrence Vance stood up in a tight suit and asked the court for immediate action. He requested that Victoria receive full control over the family trust to protect the estate from my alleged incompetence. Judge Harrington looked over his glasses at me and stated that these were incredibly severe accusations. He then asked how I responded to the claims that I could not manage my own life. The courtroom became completely silent as everyone waited for me to break down in tears. I stood up slowly, buttoned my jacket, and stared directly at Victoria for several moments without blinking. I wanted her to understand completely that I felt absolutely no fear. I turned to the bench and stated that I wanted to ensure my stepmother was completely finished speaking before I presented my response. The attorney quickly handed a document folder to the bailiff and claimed the trust account lost over $300,000 due to my neglect. Victoria added that I never checked my financial statements and had no idea the money was missing. I let the silence hang in the room for a few seconds to let them feel secure. Then I requested permission to approach the bench with my evidence. I placed a heavy black binder filled with colored navigation tabs directly in front of the judge. I explained that I did not lose track of the money but rather watched every single dollar leave the account. I revealed that the 3 shell companies receiving the stolen funds were registered in another state. The confidential corporate filings proved that the true beneficial owner of those companies was Victoria herself. The courtroom erupted into loud gasps and Victoria immediately lost her calm demeanor. She shouted that I was completely delusional and making up stories to damage her reputation. Judge Harrington silenced the room with a wave of his hand and instructed me to continue my presentation. I provided the digital tracking logs proving every single financial transfer originated directly from the home internet router of my stepmother. I then showed the bank statements showing the stolen money moving from the shell companies into a private investment account. That account was held jointly by Victoria and a secret romantic partner named Wesley Cross. They used the stolen family wealth to purchase a luxury beach condo together while my father was still alive. My relatives sat in absolute shock as they realized the incredible scope of her betrayal. Finally, I exposed the forged authorization letter that Victoria submitted as part of her official court petition. I provided a forensic document report proving the signature of my father was digitally copied from an old tax document. The digital metadata showed the file was created days after his death on the office computer of Lawrence Vance. The attorney turned pale and Victoria instantly blamed him for the entire scheme. Judge Harrington denied the petition for conservatorship immediately and referred the entire matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. He also stated that the involvement of multiple states meant federal law enforcement would likely investigate the case as wire fraud. Victoria stood there with a completely blank expression as she realized the trap she built for me had closed around her instead. I felt a profound sense of relief. Weeks later, Victoria and her attorney faced multiple criminal indictments for grand theft, forgery, and perjury. The stolen assets were frozen and fully restored to the family trust. I eventually used a portion of the inheritance to establish a university scholarship fund in honor of my late mother. I learned that true strength is not the absence of fear but the willingness to remain patient and let the truth prevail.